Hey there. Good afternoon, everybody. Uh, hey. Good morning. Good afternoon. Hey. Let's let folks join in. Hey. Hey, good morning. Good morning. Good afternoon. Okay. Alrighty, folks. So back at it again. We had a couple weeks off, and so if you all are sort of joining us for the first week, and haven't been following the last 13. My name is Trace Nelson, and a what is this pen? Hey. I'm Trace Nelson, and I am representing Black food folks in this really dope conversation collaboration we do called the politics of food. We've gone most of the summer, and we are hoping to continue through the fall. Having conversations that center food, but sort of folks who are doing work to help dismantle and empower us to think more broadly about our function in this work. Past weeks have been, we've talked to farmers, we talked to folks who do work helping small businesses navigate the professional space. And this week, I'm so excited to have Lucy Saintcyr, who is doing work that thinks very critically about what the function of activism could look like through the lens of food. So I'm excited, looking for Lucy to join in. Hey, let's see. Lucy, if you're here, like, raise your hand, but I want to make sure I don't see you quite yet. Hey. Let's see. Looking for Lucy. Hey.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm doing really well. You're looking gorgeous.
Thank you. Thank you. I got up early this morning. Instead of being on emails till about this time, I showered and relaxed, so it feels nice.
Yeah, yeah.
It feels nice. How are you?
Doing really well. I'm so grateful for you taking the time to do this. I know we were supposed to do it a couple weeks ago, and it's I think everybody needed a little bit of a break and just some time to regroup and think. So I'm
Right.
excited we got to reschedule this.
Yeah, same. It was just, I mean, last week was up in the thick of it. We were still just getting, well, not last week, but a couple weeks ago, we were still getting accustomed to transitioning from the city hall, um, literal 24-hour protest space to like the more civilian, relaxed space. And even in that transition into a more calmer, regular system, was just craziness all over. So yeah, no, this works, and as you can see, I am I'm ready.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity,
Of course.
for collaboration and working together. I think one thing that I've noticed, doing culinary movement work is that a lot of us are pretty siloed. A lot of us are dealing with our own internal stuff, are dealing with work stuff. And so it's really difficult for us to connect through all of this. And I think even just having these conversations is super important.
Right. So I want to start just kind of at the beginning. If you aren't familiar with Lucy's work, she founded an organization called the Supper Collective, and the tangible work of it is sort of is found in like June, July, was really about helping tangible protests for Occupy City Hall. And I just would love it if you could talk a little bit about sort of your origin story, because I think you are someone who I have reference for in the sort of hospitality space. But
Yes.
in the midst of this really particular moment, this work kind of has emerged. So if you could talk a little bit about that, it'd be great.
Yeah. Well, before COVID, I was a general manager running two restaurants, two natural wine French restaurants and a sommelier. And then COVID hit and just decimated the restaurant industry. In addition to, apparently the rest of the world in a lot of ways.
Right.
And then the George Floyd videos came out. And, when you're at home with nothing else to do but watch the terror, I'd be really surprised at myself if I wasn't out in the street. I'd be like, wait, what?
Right.
um,
Right.
and, I was there the first day in Atlantic Barclays, which is in downtown Brooklyn, for those who are not like New York locals. But I was there the first day, and there was a moment when like there's like a wave where the crowd like pushes back. This is my first like hardcore protest in my life. Like I was never, I grew up Haitian, like you go to church, you go to school, you stay home, you know?
Right. Right.
And so I had no clue what was happening, but I felt that push and it felt almost like being in a concert, except instead of going back in to cheer on your favorite, musician or performer, there's people suddenly like with red eyes crying and trigger warning, but bloody as well, with what looks like skull fractures and stuff like that. And seeing that, smelling the smoke of burning cars and stuff, like, I knew that I needed to be saying something, doing something, but I also knew that that wasn't necessarily my space. So I had to dial back a little bit because I'm also immunocompromised. I have a couple rare conditions that make it really difficult for me to be out in public anyway.
Right.
But then the 2021 NYPD budget hearings were starting, and I had a lot of friends in the industry, chef friends, fellow sommeliers, service bartenders, everybody. Suddenly they all ended up in that space. And I asked them, I was like, what can we get you? Like, what can I get you? What can I order from you from afar? And they said, cold water, hot food, and a place to be. And so I
Right.
got into a text chain with all the chefs and cooks that I knew, who were, active in the protest space. And we're like, what can we put together? Went in and I made two classic Haitian dishes, diriak jonjon, which is like a Haitian black mushroom rice, and sauce
Right.
pois noir, which is black beans. And I was like, I'm just gonna come in with these two trays, see, get a lay of the land. And I showed up, and there's like perishable hot fresh food that's just on the ground, bags of like perishables just hanging off of the gates right by where the police are. And we know that law enforcement has not been exactly kind to sources of nourishment.
Right.
And so I walked in, served food for about 6 to 8 hours, and texted my chef friends, was like, guys, we got a lot of work to do. And they're like, all right, we're on it. And literally within hours, we had shelving, we had tables, we had tents.
Jeez.
And I was showing up in that space, and just people were looking at me like, so you're in charge, right? And I was like, nope, I'm here to help. Just, they're like, you're in charge. And I'm like, okay, cool. So we're going to be the food team. We got like a little cheer going. Anybody watching, they knows when they hear a food team clap once. um,
That's right.
Food team clap once. Like anybody, any food volunteers, any food coordinators, to meet in the group. We go over service. Like we essentially created like a mobile kitchen, and we would have meetings 3 times a day because it was 24 hours. So
Right.
early in the morning for when the overnight shift traded over to the morning shift or the regular morning shift, and then once again between like lunch and dinner hours. And then one in between during the overnight. But the overnight one was more of a safety protocol thing because I'll be real, like law enforcement came in hard. There were 2 nights that I was present for, or partially present for, where there were raids. And as we've all seen, there have been raids every night since. And it's, City Hall, as we know, it is now defunct. But once we saw that happening, we kind of saw that, this is not necessarily our space either, but also there is a need, because what happens with occupations, with protest spaces that people haven't really caught an eye to, is that it attracts the locals, and the locals being the
Right.
unhoused, the low income, because that's usually where these things happen. And they feel a sense of security. They have a, you know, constant stream, even if it's for a day or for a week, of nourishment and community. And I was like, well, there's obviously a need. We're in the middle of an economic crisis, you know, and even before COVID, you know, local communities were suffering. Like, I live in Flatbush, and all it takes is walking down 2 avenue blocks to fully understand what's
Right.
wrong with this country. It doesn't take much. So now we're working mainly with mutual aid funds, not mutual aid funds, mutual aid networks.
So yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we mostly work with mutual aid networks, community fridges, and we're currently in talks with uh, social workers and nonprofits that have been doing harm reduction work to see if we can do a regular pop-up schedule in
Right.
certain projects. The neighborhoods we're looking at mostly is Harlem around 125th and Lex, where we've
Yeah.
done pop-ups before. Flatbush, there's already a mutual aid network in Flatbush. And then hopefully in Queens, but Queens is a whole other monster
It's
unto
a whole. Yeah.
itself.
Yes.
We would love to be in the Bronx. We know there's need in the Bronx, but we also know what our resources and limitations are, both in transit and also where we get the most volunteers, where we get the most hands. And those are also areas that have been deeply affected by COVID,
Right.
health-wise. And so it's real messed up, right? Like, we have to make a decision whether or not, so we know there's need everywhere, but we also have to decide between what risk we're personally willing to take going into COVID, like heavily
That's
COVID
real.
affected areas, but also knowing that the heavily affected COVID areas are where we're needed the most,
Right.
right? And I'm not even close to comparing what we do to, you know, the everyday nurses, doctors, nurses assistants, none of that. But having to make that decision alone is already heartbreaking enough. To have to make that decision when it's literally life or death, I can't even begin to imagine. So it's just,
Right.
it's not something, I'm already losing enough sleep as it is. It's blessings on those folk, because I just couldn't imagine. But yeah, and then also, I'm sorry, I'm
No.
super
No.
important. So we're going to be in DC this week. So actually starting tomorrow, tomorrow at 9 a.m., we're going to be driving down to DC, and we're going to be there the whole week, leading up to the March for Black Lives happening on Friday, the 28th. We're actually not going to be part of the march itself, or we usually
Okay.
set up, when we've been part of protests or direct actions, we usually set up at what I call the termination point, where the march ends, because that's when people are most hungry and tired and whatnot. We decided we're actually going to move away from the march itself and into the outer neighborhoods in DC.
Okay.
Ward 7 and 8 are the most deeply affected by income inequality and food insecurity. And usually what happens, specifically in DC, whenever these big marches and protests come through, is a massive disruption to the local communities. Like, whole transit lines are just stopped altogether or just skipped. And so if you got to go to work on Friday and it happens to be on H Street, you know, or downtown or whatever, you're an essential worker, you got to get to work, and you live
Well.
and you live further out north or southeast, like, you're screwed. And as we know, a lot of those areas were neglected in the first place. You know, there's supposedly supplies being sent down there, but, you know, unfortunately, you know, corporate restaurants and business and, you know, non-perishable snack outfits, they'll just drop off pallets nearby sideways where they think the homeless are. Or they'll, like, leave, you know, in a park, just a bunch of, like, high fat, high sodium, you know, blood pressure trigger
Yeah.
foods in these areas, and they just go bad quickly, sit in the sun, or, you know, it's not really mindful of the individuals who were there or the groups that are there. And so, you know, we've talked to local medics and in DC, and they're like, yeah, you know, we'll have good weeks where everybody's blood pressure is stabilizing, their mental health is stabilizing, and then we find out that a sub shop dropped a bunch of meatball subs and stuff, and their blood pressure goes right through the roof.
Right. Right.
Or they have food that they've been saving, like that meatball sub they'll be saving, not knowing that, you know, you can't have meat out in the open after a certain number of hours, typically 4. And then they get sick, and it makes everything worse. And so we're going to be going down there. We're building a long-term coalition. You know, I don't want to speak too much on it,
No, no,
and reveal any activist identities, but
no.
we're no, I understand. I'm just being real with y'all, because, you know, law enforcement's out here targeting food and nourishment groups, and it's messed up. But we're looking to build long-term coalitions down there. So this week, is just the beginning.
Yeah.
If anything, it's a test run to figure out like how we can best serve the communities in DC, and also source food, because a lot of those depots, a lot of those restaurant supply, food supply chain networks for the East Coast, Northeast, they're all the same. Baldor is in, like, this is, you know, getting into heady industry stuff, but like Baldor definitely serves Philly. Baldor definitely serves the DMV area. There's no reason why there should be a stopgap, like a really expensive stopgap, or any space between when food goes out from Baldor to a restaurant, and it's just in that gap. And we'd like to do it in not just in New York, but, you know, across the East Coast, if for no other reason to let them know they're not alone. And, you know, all of our struggles are very similar. But I know I just went on for a hot minute there, but I promise
It's
you that's the
perfect.
short version. I promise.
No, it's perfect. I wanted you to sort of, in your own words, talk about this work, because
Thank you.
I find so often that the language around activism the language around activism gets muddy a lot. And I think that we use the word activism in its really broad ways. And what I find so interesting about the work you do is that it's very specific and very intentional. Some of what you talk about that I'm most impacted by is the language of dignity, and the language of sort of the ways in which you show up to help. You talk a lot. I mean, just if y'all haven't, we posted a little shortly before this, but suppercollective.org, you can go and read Lucy's story, read sort of their ethos, and sort of get a feeling for what the spirit and of a collective is. But I found in hearing about your story for the first time, it made me think a lot about like Georgia Gilmore and sort of Club from Nowhere, in the sense that movement activism has to look different ways. It has to sort of collect the best resources from lots of different types of people, and people have to show up the way they are most effective. And so it's not going to look like marching for everybody. It's not going to look like culinary ministry. It's not going to look, but that there's the sense that in every movement that's ever been sustainable, I mean, the boycott specifically were funded and sort of sustained by this kind of sense of necessity in the culinary space to feed people, to provide infrastructure, to provide resources for infrastructure. And that's kind of where people forget about the food space as being uniquely effective in that way. And I would love if you could talk a little bit about the ethos of your collective, because you talk a lot about your own story in terms of sort of food security and showing up with that clarity of seeing people as full and human and deserving of dignity, and what that looks like in terms of the frameworks of your practice.
Well, I'll frame it with this. So the mission statement that we have on our website, it's an amalgam of a lot of different influences. The biggest one is the 10-point program from the Black Panthers.
That's right.
But specifically around the free lunch program, and depending on what city it was just generally free food program. But one thing that capitalist system is the most threatened is when we're self-sustaining every time. When you think about the massacre in Wilmington, in Tulsa, it's when we're self-sustaining. You know, when you think about the horrors of Reconstruction, it comes down to us being self-sustaining. That's the biggest threat, and that is the biggest need. Threat. We obviously know it's not a threat, like an actual threat. But that being said, bringing it back to, you know, dignity and the culinary ministry. I mean, look, I'll be real. I mean, I spent 6 years of my life homeless myself in Boston. It wasn't like glamorous running from, you know, train car to train car and catching the commuter rail illegally. No, it wasn't any of that like cute punk shit. Excuse my language. But
no,
it was having days and weeks of not knowing where my next meal was coming from at home, and being forced to go to school on time to make sure that I got breakfast on the days that it wasn't available, making sure that I could sneak in a couple extra, you know, leftovers during lunch. And I don't think I have to explain how embarrassing that is for a middle schooler or a high schooler to go through. Getting made fun of for wanting the extras, but you can't say that when everybody's trying to, you know, flex and pretend that they can afford the new shoes that they're showing off, when all of our mothers are, you know, portioning food stamps together. You can't have those conversations. And so when you're working with people who are unhoused and, you know, in tents, and sometimes not even that much, just, you know, their little cart and bags somewhere, you know, in their little corner in the street in New York or Harlem or wherever, you know, in New York, Harlem specifically, because that's where I've seen a lot of it, or in DC around Union Station or around the White House, ironically enough. They are literally not seen as people or even objects to consider walking around or interacting with. And never mind the embarrassment and shame that I experienced in middle school and high school. Like, could you imagine being a grown ass amount of humiliation and embarrassment in just being in that situation, and then having to accept food or supplies from a stranger, especially in the middle of a pandemic where you don't know where it's coming from. You know, the people who, you know, oftentimes the people who do accept, you know, they just want a hello. They want to have like a short conversation, like a what up, because they just want to be acknowledged as people. You know, like, tell me what's in this food before you throw it at me. Tell me where you got this water before you just chuck it down, you know, like, and I'm trying to imagine what, like, myself in that space in 2020, and I can't, because as bad as I thought I had it, you know, I was still poor in the 90s when we were, you know, we were all affluent, allegedly. You know, things have gotten worse in a very unique way between the pandemic, the economic crisis, and things have gotten worse. And what I've noticed is at the end of the day, if nothing else gets better, people just want to be seen as human and want to be acknowledged as human. And it goes a long, long way to getting them to accept further help and tell us about what their needs are. When you just treat them like a human, like, hey, what up? What's going on? How's your day? Not like, oh, hi, how are you? I have like a little here. Like, they're not dogs. They're not little children.
Yeah.
You know? But it goes, go back to those basics. And then also, the other side is a lot of these chefs and cooks that we work with,
Say it.
they
Also,
want to work. They want to train and get better. They didn't spend their savings on a knife kit as expensive as each one of those individual tools are, yet alone the kit itself. Like, they didn't spend all that time working minimum wage, or in some cases for free, massage, in some cases for free, to just be sitting at home. Like, I don't want to get too deep into national policy.
no,
A lot of that rhetoric of like, oh, we're paying them too much with this extra. No, like, what? We don't want to be home. We don't want to just be home. No offense, introverts. Like, have your space at home and all that too. But speaking for like the culinary world, and specifically the Black culinary world, we did not go through all of that to be sitting at home. That was my singular thing that drove me crazy, was like, wow, I spent all of this time getting passed over from promotions, from restaurant to restaurant, getting talked down to, felt up by these like VIPs. I went through all of that to finally get to a place where I'm a GM and a SOM, and COVID just snatched that away. I can't imagine if you were like a cook, a line cook, or a sous, and you were this close. It's your first time in the kitchen and you're finally behind the line. You just want to learn how to make a proper eggs Benedict dip, and it just gets snatched out of you. Oh, and you don't have income. Oh, and you don't qualify for unemployment. Oh, you're not insured. Like, people want the dignity of work too. We're not at home just waiting for a handout. Like, no. Like, I spent most of my stimulus, actually all of my stimulus check making myself a culinary garden, like building a garden for myself. So at any time, if I'm hungry, like, water it some more, fertilize it some more, and boop, 2 weeks, I got it. I got all I need for another 2 weeks. Like, I'm not trying to be lazy, and most of the chefs and cooks I know, we're not trying to, none of us are trying to be lazy. We want the dignity of work.
Yeah, somebody in the comments said, "You still a GM," and I'm the same. I'm a working chef as well, and there's this. I wonder sometimes about this moment it feels like so many things kind of converge at the same moment. And I think about the lifestyle we were living in terms of the pace and the work,
right?
And the focus that we had to have, and a lot of the transformational movement that's happening really is only happening because, like you said, so many folks are just all this raw talent and all of this sort of just untapped like fire, and people just this sort of ability to harness that talent into something productive has probably been a big mental health savior as well,
right.
For folks getting back. I think some of the stuff we're seeing with like restaurants converting over to kitchen spaces and like doing sort of resource kitchens all over the cities. Like, they've been a big part of it as well. Of like, how do I bring back my staff? Well, if we can get these grants to sort of provide frontline worker meals, all those elements have all kind of contribute to folks just feeling whole, getting back in those whites and feeling like you in that mode. Oh my God, it's such a good point.
Yeah, but also like in that mode for a purpose that isn't just making money for some wealthy owner, like there's a lot of people in like on our like in the leadership team of the Supper Collective where like they're like, this is the hardest I've worked in years and I love it. And I'm like, what? Like
because it gets so superficial so quickly. I think sometimes
right.
I think we were in this mindset where it was self-perpetuating and there was no
Absolutely.
perspective. And I think also, I don't know how you feel, but there's something, I think surely our industry is in flux. Surely a lot of financial hardship is happening. Surely a lot of restaurants won't come back. But I don't know. I feel more optimistic than some folks because it feels to me like the folks who are gonna kind of come back, and especially folks who have weathered through this and kind of figured out a renewed purpose, are kind of
Right.
uniquely prepared and uniquely made to be able to come out the other side of this even better, even smarter, even more dexterous.
I mean, you know, I have a controversial opinion in that I feel like
Okay.
a lot of these like white owned, white run businesses that are trying and shutting down, you know what? Good. And look, I know that's gonna probably screw up some job
No, but
opportunities for me in the future. But you know, at the end of the
I mean,
day,
I feel you.
good. Because I'll put it this way, right? So the number one thing that we've been hearing about, you know, like we read in early on that Gabrielle Hamilton
Yes, the
piece,
timepiece.
right?
Yeah,
Where they talk about overhead and high labor costs and et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these restaurateurs in New York City specifically, extremely
same.
wealthy. Your investors extremely wealthy. If there's one thing that Albany is going to listen to, it's wealthy people. Why didn't y'all pool together and create your own little union and lobby for reimbursements or stipend programs or for subsidies so that you don't have to pay such high rent? The same way that every new building or in every neighborhood there has to be an allocation for subsidized housing or outright free saturated housing. Why aren't they doing that for restaurants in New York City? When New York like restaurants make up like big and small, I'm including bodegas, make up about an eighth of the economy, an eighth. That is huge. None of y'all thought to get together in the 80s when y'all had all this money to throw around, in the 90s
Say
when you
it.
had more money to throw around, and now when, you know, the top 10 billionaires who are investors in a lot of these big restaurants too made nearly $500 billion during the pandemic alone. None of y'all thought to get together and be like, hey, Mr. Cuomo, why don't you do like a subsidy thing and we'll help you get reelected? It's outright corruption, don't get me wrong. But if
No, no.
overhead was really that concerning to you to make to keep your business in like open, why
Yeah.
didn't you lobby for that? And don't act like the pandemic was new, like made this whole thing new. Labor and overhead were major costs for a lot of these restaurants for decades. And so
Well,
that's
that's a
why I'm just like, you know what? If this is what it takes for you to realize you were doing it all wrong, was you losing on this investment, then so be it. And I'm not saying that to wish that on the small restaurateurs or the, you know, the small business. You know, that's why part of the food that we provide for SSC, whenever we order from Black owned businesses, we never ask for discounts. We never ask for anything for
that's
free,
right.
none of that.
That's right.
We're like, okay, even if we helped you keep alive for another month, good, great. All these other businesses, though, I don't want to
Yep.
hear nothing about you're so sorry about your undocumented. Please support. Like whenever I see businesses, and I'm sorry for going on this rant, but whenever I
No,
see
go ahead.
businesses post up relief funds for their former employees, I cackle. I'm like,
Got
really?
questions. I got questions.
Really? I cackle and I got so many questions. Man, I feel like Angela Bassett in Waiting to Exhale, where she's like with the gasoline over her rich ex-husband's car. That's how I feel whenever I see that, because I'm just like, really, you had no opportunity in the last 2 decades alone, no opportunity to find a way to keep your undocumented workers from being in this place of suffering. You had no way to make sure that your server's minimum wage wasn't $3 and only until recently 10, when they're pulling in all the get out of here. Like,
That's
nah,
right.
no. So like, you know, and frankly, a lot of the ground organizations, like the grassroots food organizations that I'm working with, here in New York and in DC, I'd say 98% are all like restaurant industry people. Like
Yep.
all restaurant industry, mostly Black women as well, of course.
That's right.
Mostly Black women, like all of us, like trans, non-binary, cis. It's mostly Black and Latinx women that are doing, and you know, I, no offense or to any of the, you know, other BIPOC women out there. I'm not trying to exclude you. I'm just talking about the people
No,
that
but
I've met.
yes,
I'm
ma'am.
just I'm just talking about the people that I've met. I'm not trying to be exclusionary, but like we've all been in this industry and we're all working more than we ever have been. But the same way that I was willing to spend 3 hours a day minimum to read through all the minutia of Grand Crus and then pay $1,600 for the intro and certified test. The same way I was willing and prepared to do that, the same way I'm willing to and prepared to do this without any guarantee of income in the future.
That's
Why?
right.
Because also, that's the other thing, and I'm done, I promise.
No, go ahead.
That's the other thing is that this is the dirty secret of the industry. A lot of this stuff that they're charging people so much money for, it's actually quite inexpensive. In the Eater article that I did about a month ago, Luke asked me, why aren't you just, you know, it sounds like you're feeding really nice food. Why don't you just feed them like pizza and snacks? And I was like, Luke, I don't even know where to begin with that.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I'll put it, look, according to Forbes in 2017, in the average cost of a 16-inch, so full-size pizza, was $1.50 cost. And the average cost of a full-size pizza, you know, depending on what borough you're in, is definitely not that. I mean, even a
Right.
slice goes for $5 some places. It actually costs us more to order pizza. It actually costs us more to go to Costco and get all these chips.
Right.
Getting chefs together, going to, you know, produce, green markets, like getting all of that stuff together, it costs maybe 80 cents. Right now it's costing us 80 cents per serving, $1 per serving. And if we're adding meats to it, 2 to 3. I mean, the price significantly goes up when we're ordering from, you know, restaurants, but, you know, we know that we're helping them out, so it's not a big deal to us. But
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff isn't expensive, and it always has been. And so it's, yeah, this is a sore subject for me because a lot of the wrongdoings of the industry, a lot of the evils of the industry have been pretty naked for a long time. And doing this work makes it even more naked in a way that I'm like, wow. Y'all out here
Well,
charging people $30 for a set of tacos, and it didn't cost you that to make it. But yeah, sorry.
well,
I'm sure you
no,
have
no,
other
because
things you want to talk
no.
about.
This is great. This is perfect. The only thing I'm thinking about hearing that part, because I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. There is a, especially as we sort of gotten outside of our typical practices, right? Like we all were working in these spaces that maybe even not necessarily fine dining spaces, but certainly
Yeah.
in the business of the mechanism of restaurants, right? Like the whole point is to make money. And so yeah, there is absolutely disparity in terms of what things cost and what we charge. I'm wondering about, because there's something also really interesting in what you said, kind of about, I think about the way in which culinary folks show up to food justice. I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the things I was so impacted by really early on in my work was connecting with people like Karen Washington and like Leah Penniman, who are doing food justice work, but connected to larger movements. And so talking to somebody like Leah, she talks about how like the Black Lives Matter movement, the movement for Black Lives, had always thought about food and food sovereignty as a platform, like plotted initiative, right? As like a legitimate aim and goal for the framework of the activism. But it always struck me, especially really in the early days of my own work, that we these folks who were in the food space doing this food justice work weren't thinking or talking to culinary and hospitality professionals. There seemed to be this strange disconnect where we have a perspective that is unique and could add so much richness to the work that was being done. And it's also a through way to sort of help and to sort of be useful in movement making that calls on your inherent talents. And so I'm wondering if you think at all about because again, the work you're doing, you're thinking about, it's not just, it's certainly centered in feeding folks and trying to sort of be the immediate, sort of tangible, connective, like useful thing that people need in the moment. But I'm wondering about, especially as you think about the long-term function of the work you do,
Right.
and its connection to larger movements. If you are thinking about, because your point about like deputizing food people and hospitality people to sort of see the expansive nature of the work we could be helpful with. If you think it doesn't necessarily have to be specifically housed in the space of food justice, but how do you approach larger movements that maybe aren't centered in, like, so the protest work you're doing wasn't sort of centered in this idea around food justice. It was providing like tactical, tangible background support for larger movements. That's one aim. There's also absolutely the aim of like the direct food sovereignty space, and like, so I'm just wondering, like, going forward, what lanes are you most passionate about? What lanes are most, I don't know, fruitful for your spirit, fruitful for the resources that you have?
Well, this has been an internal conversation for a long time, internal to Supper Collective for, I say a long time, like we've been here for years. That's what time is like right now. But it's been 2 months, and that's wild to think about. But anyway, it's been an internal conversation for a while because, look, here's the thing, and I got to be real with you. As from a fundraising perspective, because we're still donation based, we're still charity based, right? The thing that helps us raise the most money and receive the most supplies is like the sexy trauma porn. And I'm not saying that trauma porn is actually sexy. I'm being real.
No, I know what you said. Yes.
People want to see us on the ground in the thick of things. I mean, the type of donations that we saw like post raid were equally encouraging and frightening to me, because it's like, why does it take this level of like violence in your feed for you to understand the risk that we're taking, the work that we're doing? You know, so that's a thought. It's like, wow, like suddenly we have to think about protests and groundwork like fundraising. There's something hideous about that, you know. I think it speaks to the nature of social media and what trends, you know, because those positive stories, the stories of positivity and growth are not what you see go viral, really. I mean, not at the same levels as the, you know, the trauma porn, like I mentioned. So we know that we can't exactly move entirely away from protests and groundwork. But it's like I said at the beginning of the conversation, we also have to consider our, you know, resources and personal safety as well. My thought has always been, if the food goes, the community goes. You know, if, you know, that's why food deserts tend to be high crime areas. Who knew if you were starving, you'd do whatever it took to get some food or resources? Who knew? And so we're like, all right, well, how do we support the groundwork? And some of the thoughts that, like the protests and direct action work, so some of the thoughts that are circulating internally are doing, you know, jail support, like new mutual aid groups, community fridges, pop-ups, supporting those, things like that. Anything personally, this is just for me personally, anything involving Black trans housing and food security, period. Anything involving that at all. Black trans women, Black non-binary, Black trans men, they are just the most neglected and ignored. you know, in addition to veterans and the disabled, real talk, like it's
That's right.
another hideous reality. So, you know, anything to do with our sisters and non-binary people there. And then, but the big thing for us is partnering with local shelters, food banks, harm reduction organizations. Huge shout out to Vocal NYC because they've been assisting us this whole. They approached us while we were still on the ground. They're like, "Hey, it seems like you want to do long-term movement work." I was like, "I didn't say that." And they're like,
Ah,
"We'll see you." I
that's
remember
right.
meeting Kareem and Jeremy, and they're like, "We'll see you." And yeah, here we are. But yeah, just working. Like my dream is to recreate the city hall stations, having a supply like personal hygiene, feminine product supply station,
Yeah.
basic like pain relievers, like PPE,
Yeah.
hot food, snacks, fresh fruit, water, and then like a mini library, a mini med station, and doing like set hours and doing a set schedule, popping up in different like projects, different communities or parks, wherever. That's the dream.
Mm,
I mean,
that's right.
obviously, a building
You,
and a shared kitchen would be fantastic.
yes.
Fantastic. Because I know at least 3 other organizations, food organizations, that are trying to do the same thing, like just buy a kitchen and have shared hours.
Yeah.
So we're not like completely throwing off all of our smoke detectors every day.
That's right. That's
But,
right.
you know, but yeah,
Infrastructure.
that's
It's infrastructure. Yeah.
it's food structure. So it ties to me the work in harm reduction and pop-ups in um, tenements like public housing that directly connects the ongoing protest work
Absolutely.
with like the practical everyday, because at the end of the day most of the people who've been living in these projects in low income areas or in unhoused camps, they've been in the city for decades, and chances are they're also probably working too. They don't have the time or the energy, literally the energy, to be out in the street marching. I mean, I lose my voice every 2 days just from being on the phone every day from 6 a.m. on with my team, with other teams, whatever. You know, like that alone is a lot of work and a lot of physical and psychological labor to put yourself through. But if any of us working on the ground and in protest mean what we say by working with the communities, doing, if you are not doing the hot mic, the megaphone, the marching, the shouting, the trauma porn, and also doing the unseen work in the community, um, the not so sexy, being in the heat,
Yes.
you know, working out how to put together recipes that are soul food but not high sodium. Like, if you're not doing
That
that
part.
too, and it doesn't have to be food, you know, but like if you're not figuring out how to get, because there's free EMT training now. There's
Okay.
free CPR training now. If you're not doing that and also doing that work, that longevity, then I can't talk to you. I'm sorry. I can't talk
Right.
to you.
Right.
That disconnect is not what I'm here for. I'm here to like take the theory, take the yelling, take the screaming, take the like all that energy and channel it into a balanced meal and a
Mm,
mask and hand sanitizer that is otherwise too expensive for families to get to.
that's right.
I'm here to
That's
make
right.
that connection and that connection only. Um, but I hope that answers your question.
No, it absolutely does. Folks who maybe joined us late and didn't see tags, I'm talking with Lucy Saintcyr of the Supper Collective, and this has been so dope. I want to leave the last 5 or 6 minutes if anyone has any questions. People have been really generous about resources in the comments. Um, Folks have just been getting your life from all of the pros you've been dropping. Um, yeah, I want to leave the last. If anybody has any questions, just drop them either in the question box or in comments. But um, can you talk a little bit about what people can do? Because you talked a lot about support, and we didn't really get into like the tactical or tangible sort of like nuts and bolts of what the work you do looks like. And that's a conversation for another day, because I think that's like I want to talk to you about that separately, because the infrastructure part you're talking about is so dope and is so necessary, and is, I think, in community could easily get that done. But I wonder about
Yes.
I guess I'm wondering about what support could look like for you now. You're talking about the DC project you have going on right now. Folks can definitely go to your site and support financially. What are the tangible resources you need that maybe if someone's listening and has the fairy wand or whatever, or just has resources that they don't think they didn't see as valuable, could give to help and support?
I'm going to get real practical here.
Yeah.
This is not stuff you're going to see. Real practical. Number one, space to cook. So if anyone watching, anyone connected in any sort of food industry who has access to a kitchen that is closed or operating at minimal hours, if you have a kitchen space to offer, it is not just for myself. I'm talking about all the other food orgs. Is the number one thing, because right now we are all working out of our homes. We're all working off of like candlelit burners, like
that's right,
and spending a lot of money on generators to keep things hot or cold or whatever. Kitchen space. So if you have, and even if it's not a kitchen space, office space, storage unit, if you can assist in providing a shared space, even if it's only in limited hours, like 6 to 12 hours, like a day, or even less than that. Honestly, you give me and my chefs 4 hours to like come in, do prep, pack up, head out. We can do the rest elsewhere, whatever. But space, supplies. So water, always, of course. But if you know anybody in the industry who has access to like even just offering your card 1 day a week. I say card, like a membership card to Baldor, who's a major food distributor.
That's right.
Or you have any deals with any of the local green market vendors, any Black-owned businesses, anything, that's what I mean by a card. I mean access.
Yep. No,
so we can work with them and buying in bulk. Instead of spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars a day per. Then also supplies as in PPE, personal hygiene. And this is, by the way, this is huge for not just New York, but also DC. Y'all, seriously, the DMV area, Baltimore and DC, like specifically Ward 7 and 8, but Baltimore and DC, y'all, like not all the footage you see and all that trauma porn, like that is going unseen and unsaid in that area because they are so used to it. And there are a lot of forces at hand keeping it out of the public eye. The food insecurity, the lack of the basic supplies are like, it is extreme and it is vast. So if you have any access whatsoever, containers so we can put the food into, travel toothbrushes, travel toothpaste. Oral hygiene can kill you. Like poor oral hygiene, you get a bad infection that can kill you. So seriously, any connections to oral hygiene, personal protection, so sanitizer, masks. And then if you work in electronics, and again, I know this is realizing I'm getting into the weeds, but this is real.
No.
Like there's a lot of virtual classes out there. And parents who cannot afford like the extra pair of headphones, and also to sanitize those headphones for those classes. But yeah, like supplies, so containers, PPE, personal hygiene, all of that. Of course, monetary donations, but we realize we're in an economic crisis right now. 42 million unemployed and 170,000 plus dead from COVID. That's the real. Not everybody can send money like that. But you know what you can do? If you do have a rich friend that can provide a fiscal sponsorship, thank you.
Yep.
And if you need any receipts to make sure we're not messing around with, your money, you're worried about your reputation, whatever, my assistant director, who also handles our social media and finances, is happy to send you literally probably a gigabyte at this point of images of receipts.
That's right.
Of
That's
receipts,
right.
in case you're wondering where that money might go to, or if you're worried about being a fiscal sponsor, or to receive bulk supplies or whatever it takes. Like, fiscal sponsorship is what most of us need, and or access to those bulk supplies. Like, if all we have to do is pay for storage, like, having those supplies literally saves us hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
any of that access, and then also volunteering. We're going to be in the DMV area, specifically in DC, on the ground Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week. This is the beginning. It is an ongoing coalition. So if you have any sort of free time and hands, because if we get all the supplies, we get the kitchen, we get the donations, if we don't have anybody there to physically do the work and be present,
Yeah.
to be kind to the people on the ground, then, because I'm only one person, I only have one team, hands. Chef's calling for hands. I don't know how else to put it. If that's all you got is hands, believe me, we'll have a place to send you and to assist. But shout out specifically to the DC, Baltimore area. Those organizations need assistance.
Yes.
Spread Karma has been helping us out a lot. The Unity for Native and Indigenous people in Baltimore as well. Everybody Eats, run by Courtney and Lauren in DC. Ashton Berry, everything Ashton
That's
Berry
right.
does, everything
That's right.
Janine Copeland does, everything Erica Christian does. She just recently started the initiative, the Orange Room, which is specifically for Black food professionals and associates to just have a space to vent about all of the craziness that's going on.
Yes.
Fuel the People, Allegra and Rudy, they're family. And then finally, Food for Change, run by Monique, that's based here in New York. And again, Vocal, thank you so much. But yeah, I mean, if I forgot anybody, I'm so sorry. My brain is downloading and sending out information like constantly.
No, we have one question. Is like some of the resources that the list of asks you gave was brilliant. But then also list of organizations is I didn't on your website. Are there have you listed out or sort of like given out tangible checklist items that people could give it, or ways in which people could help? Because somebody was asking if there was a resource space that people could share out that had a lot of the things you just mentioned.
We just got our whole logo set and website up and running like fully this week with like the food counter and all of that. So we haven't put up that list yet. We've been sending it out individually, but believe me, Chandler, if you're watching, Chandler does our social media and visuals. Her and my good friend John. So if y'all are watching, keep in mind.
Absolutely.
But no, literally within the next few hours, we'll have that list on the website, and it's typically on the Instagram page as well. But I'm happy to post that with a list of all the things that we mentioned, like long term and short term, both in New York and the DMV area.
Lucy, this has been great. I'm so excited for all the cool work you have going on. Looking forward to being in person with you soon, and looking forward to seeing the growth of the work you're doing. And you made a point on your site that I found really powerful, and it's really my like sort of marker for folks who do any sort of activist work. It's really that like you hope that there comes a point where you don't need to be useful, right? Like that the Suffolk Collective doesn't need to be in existence. And I just found that so powerful, because this sense sometimes that the perpetual nature of you use words like trauma, all that kind of savior mentality it gets messy and mired in the fact that we are actually talking about solving problems. So hopefully get to a place where you're not necessary.
And it forces everyone who joins our team, temporarily or long term, including myself, to remember not to center and not to use ego not to use ego for personal good or for personal clout. Like there's a lot of people, and we're not going to go into that, who are just
Okay.
there to get followers, and I'm like, I don't care, because I shouldn't have to do this. I
Okay.
shouldn't. None of us should have to be doing this. If we were good right now, I'd be at brunch. I'd actually be sleeping in right now. I got up pretty early. Like, I shouldn't
Yeah.
have to do this. We shouldn't have to
Yeah.
rely on a defunct Congress. We shouldn't have to rely on like baby little crumbs to hand out. I shouldn't be begging for supplies or spaces. None of that. But here I am. And, you know, as long as I'm able to keep a roof over my head, water and food, and my hygiene intact, I'm going to keep doing it. And the
That's
day
right.
that we are obsolete is the day that we will celebrate. But until then, we will aim for joy where we can, aim for
That's right.
health where we can, but keep doing the work.
Yes. Thank you
Nothing
so much.
else to be said. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right. Y'all, that was so good. Thank you so much for paying attention. I've been Therese Nelson, and Black Food Folks is fully packed today with dope programming. If you go over to Black Food Folks right now, Aretta Itar is in conversation with Portia Wilson. That's from 1 to 2. At 4 o'clock, Joy Chevalier is going to be in conversation with Marcus Samuelson. And then later on tonight at 7 o'clock, a weekly conversation that is so dope is going to be Cicely and Mavis doing their drink tank program. That is kind of a roundup of the week before. So if you like this content and want to sort of support what Black Food Folks are doing, jump off of here, take a breath, and go over to Black Food Folks Instagram Live and check out all the dope things they have going on today and the rest of the week. So thank y'all. We'll be back next week for more politics of food, and appreciate y'all paying attention.